So why do Democrats love violent criminals so much? This is actually a tough question to answer because any explanation really is just shocking to the average person out there. But I will attempt to explain the very partisan public policies that we're witnessing in Washington state today, probably in other states where you might live too, as it applies to violent crime in our community. Now, this video topic is partisan in nature because when you look at the laundry list of legislation that's been proposed almost exclusively by the Washington State Democrats, and I'll link to those bills down below, you just can't escape the conclusion that the Democratic Party clearly wants to support violent criminals and has almost no concern over the victims that these people create in our communities. Now, in order to understand the crazy legislation that's like making sure that violent felons can vote in elections while they're in prison, or the effort to put violent sex predators on the policy board that determines sentencing for violent sex predators, I mean, presuming that they have life experiences, I guess, that will assist in that process, or perhaps the desire to early release violent felons into the community, or stop prosecutors from even enforcing the criminal laws, or perhaps just attacking the police for daring to enforce the law and arrest criminals in the first place. All of these policies and many more in this kind of genre of craziness come exclusively from one side of the political spectrum. This just can't be denied. Now, the weird part of this is that the same party that wants to put violent felons right back out on the street, or to basically ensure they never have to go to jail in the first place, it is the exact same people who are at the same time trying to criminalize political dissent and who always support criminalizing basically crimes against bureaucracy. Oh, you ran over a pocket gopher with your tractor? You go to jail. You failed to fill out the paperwork correctly? You lose your business. You try to question authority? You're shadow banned, silenced, and canceled. Oh, if you paraded without a permit, you go to prison for years. Now, when I worked at the Freedom Foundation a number of years ago, my fellow colleague Trent England had helped write a book a few years before that about the overcriminalization of federal law. And this was when he worked at the Heritage Foundation. Now, it has been roughly estimated that there's approximately 5,000 federal statutes and 300,000 regulations that have criminal penalties attached to them. Import the wrong orchid, you can go to prison. Pick up the wrong egg from the wrong nest in Alaska, prison time for you, and felony for life. Of course, this actually happened to an acquaintance of mine a number of years ago. So if somebody actually wants to reduce the crimes against bureaucracy or greatly reduce the evils of civil asset forfeiture, for example, and then maybe reduce the thousands of ways the average person can theoretically violate some random law with no victim and no intent and yet still be charged with a felony, I'm on your side. And I actually believe that we can make progress in that area. But under the guise of criminal justice reform, these are never the changes that the Democrats want to see. No, actually instead, they want to make it easier to steal cars and shoplift and rape and murder and molest children and assault people without consequences. And they sure don't want you to defend yourself or protect your family with a firearm. In fact, almost every elected Democrat in Washington state now exists in this very narrow policy agenda category right now. And unfortunately, this seems to be true with the Democrats throughout the nation. Now, I believe that this policy divide is just another example of the divide between the elites and the rest of us. And it appears that there are legitimate origins for some policy goals, but the practical outcomes are horrific in the real world. The Democrats usually couch this wide variety of criminal reform bills kind of in the context of race, usually disparate impact, although they seem to ignore the very obvious fact that the very minorities they claim to protect are disproportionately also the victims of these crimes. And yet the race of victims never matters to the Democrats when it comes to public policy. However, race is just a smokescreen to eliminate debate or any resistance to their absurd policy proposals. I really believe that this is a policy divide based on an elitist mindset among the Democrat politicians in our state and the rest of us. Now, most of these criminal justice reforms the Democrats have championed, from attacking and denigrating the police to secretly releasing the most violent sex predators the state has ever seen back in the neighborhoods, all are policies that most of our liberal elite don't believe are going to impact them. For example, who do you think is most likely to become a victim of a crime, particularly property crime like auto theft, home invasion, assault, rape, child molestation, etc.? An executive for Amazon living in a multi-million-dollar mansion in Kirkland, or somebody who's living in an apartment complex on East Hill Kent? Do you think that the Microsoft project manager living in Issaquah in a gated community is more likely to suffer the impacts of the escalating crime wave more than the person who just moved into a small and still very expensive starter home in Burien? Now, listen, I don't have to answer that question for you because it's not a trick question. The answer is very obvious. The people who live in apartments, trailer parks, small modest subdivisions, and far away from a gated community are certainly the ones most impacted by the growing crime wave that we're experiencing. And yet, I've yet to see right now any Democrats in our state with even a modicum of serious concern for the thousands of victims of the escalating crime wave. The only priority the Democrats in Washington state have right now appears to be how quickly that they can get the violent offenders back out on the street, or even better, keep them out of jail in the first place. I mean, no matter what crime they commit. And of course, they want the criminals to keep voting for the Democrats who kept them out of jail in the first place. Their second priority, and I mean the second priority of the Democrats, appears to be the Democrats' obsession right now with trying to ensure that no future victims of these Democrat-assisted early release felons can actually defend themselves from the violent felons who want to victimize them. Taking away people's guns seems to be a very high priority for every Democrat in the state today. Now, the victims of this escalating crime wave, the Democrats just don't see them as real people anymore. And it's weird and it's heartless, and yet it's true. Now, I'm not sure how many of the absurd soft-on criminals bills that are currently being proposed by the Democrats will actually pass this legislative session. Probably most of them won't. But the ideas that Democrats are attaching themselves to right now would not be supported by most average people if the general public ever discovers just how insane many of these partisan policies really are. Now listen, we've actually been here before, both in our nation and our state. By most major metrics of criminal statistics, the worst era was in the late 70s through kind of the mid-1990s. And this was also the result of a mostly Democratic Party-endorsed progressive movement in the 1950s to 60s era that also resulted in exactly the same predictable result that we're witnessing today. Now listen, they didn't have social media back then to disseminate the absurd outcomes as quickly, but the stats from that era were horrible and the body counts were high. Remember, that is the reason Washington State passed the Community Protection Act in 1990 in the first place, to register violent sex predators in our state. It's also why the people passed the original 3 Strikes and You're Outlaw. It was an initiative for violent felons in the state in the early 1990s. And frankly, this was a wave of general disgust with the Democrats that resulted at the time in the largest political turnover in state history in 1994, just 30 years ago. Now that wave of general popular disgust, I believe, is building again today. Now, honestly, I would expect the Democrats to back off of this policy insanity, but they seem hell-bent on just winning the violent sex predator and violent felon vote this time around. And I'm sure they're going to get that vote. But the rest of us who are victims of the policy, this Democrat policy agenda in this area, we're not going to be silenced for much longer. I see the anger and the disgust everywhere I go in our state, from Seattle to Colville. And I'm not sure why the Democrats are ignoring this, but there it is. That's what's happening. Now, that being said, change, particularly political and policy change, doesn't just happen accidentally or by osmosis. It does take work. It takes lots of work, and especially if you want to make a difference. And this requires us to show up to make that difference. And when I say show up, I mean you and I. We have to reach out to our neighbors, and we have to work together to protect our communities. We need to coordinate with other groups of people and communities nearby and share the truth about how these policy changes from Olympia and our county and city governments are really hurting us. And we have to demand change. Now, when they refuse to change, and I've yet to meet anyone in this new crew of elected Democrats who have any inclination to moderate their alignment with violent criminals, then we need to change the people who make the policy. Self-destructive, kind of community-destructive public policy won't last long, but it can produce a lot of unnecessary victims along the way. So the sooner we fix the policy and remove the crazy politicians who support this stuff, the better off we all will be. Change won't happen because you hide in your basement, close your eyes, and then hope it all goes away. Or if you sit back hoping for some miraculous plan to save you. Nobody is coming to save us. We have to save ourselves, and we have to show up to do it. Because in the end, the future only belongs to those who show up.